Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our third and final event in Talks with Texas 4000 for Cancer, Cancer and COVID-19, as well as our talk with Dr. Jon Huigbreste. My name is Alex, and I am on the Ozarks route, and I served as the programs chair this year.
And my name is Claire. I'm also on the programs route, and I was a part of programs and NPR this year.
And hi, I'm Katie. I'm on the Rockies route, and I was the Rockies programs coordinator for this year. And we're so excited to be here today.
Yes. So just to introduce who we are, Texas 4000 for Cancer is an 18-month leadership development program that recruits students from the University of Texas at Austin. And traditionally, each of us fundraises $4,500 for cancer research as well as support services. We also volunteer 50 hours in our community and bike over 2,000 miles in preparation for our Keystone event, which is a 4,000-mile bike ride from Austin, Texas to Anchorage, Alaska. And so for the first time since the founding of our organization, we will not be biking from Austin to Alaska, due to the threat of the current COVID pandemic, which poses a particular threat to the general public as well as the cancer community. And so we've made considerable adjustments to the physical summer ride to protect those that we ultimately hope to serve. And as such, we wanted to continue to engage with communities like yours in this virtual environment. And so we continue the fight from home. Had we not canceled the ride this summer, the 2020 Ozarks route would have visited Be the Match almost 2 weekends ago in Minneapolis. And so we created an event with Be the Match to try and promote the registry as well as raise awareness of the inequity on the registry. It's much harder for a person of color to find a bone marrow donor or a match and a cure to blood cancers than it is for a white person. And so that inspired this series, the Talks with Texas 4000, where we really wanted to shine a light on inequity in cancer care, as well as get to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has affected the cancer community. And so today we're going to be wrapping up these events, talking about healthcare inequity, how cancer, the healthcare inequity, and the pandemic intersect. So first we'll talk kind of big picture, the ways that the pandemic has affected healthcare, cancer care, and deepened some of those healthcare inequities that already exist. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Jon Huigbreste on how his research pertains to both cancer and COVID-19. Very exciting. And we'll talk, finish off this event with testimonials from Nikki, Bryn, and Paige, 3 of our writers, on how the pandemic has affected them and the loved ones that they have that are battling cancer currently. And we also want to dedicate this program today to our teammate Colin's mom, who recently lost her battle with cancer. And so to get us started, Katie, Claire, and I are going to talk through some of the basics of cancer inequity in the U.S. Pull those slides up. Awesome. It's got to be my favorite graphic from our series. And so as we've talked about in our previous events, we at Texas 4000 fervently believe that your income, insured status, much like your ethnicity or the color of your skin, should never determine your outcome in cancer. But as we'll talk about today, they do. And this has only become more apparent as the pandemic has worsened. And it's my hope that by talking about this, we can work to give everyone a fighting chance. Next slide. Okay, so these are the graphics that I like to show. We showed this one on the left at our last talk to demonstrate just how dramatic inequities in cancer care in the US are. And so even if we account for population density, as they do on the left here, this cancer belt area bears a disproportionate burden of cancer. We see a much higher mortality rate in that area of the country, as well as other diseases like diabetes and obesity, which you can see to the right here. Those areas with the highest incidence of both obesity and diabetes are teal, and you can see that that overlaps almost perfectly with our cancer belt. And so I wanted to show this mostly to kind of visually demonstrate how this inequity is not only linked to environment, it's not just plants, it's not just lifestyle, it's more reflective of systemic inequities and problems in accessing care that kind of reach past cancer into other diseases. And the pandemic has made this abundantly clear, since cancer, diabetes, and obesity have been identified as biological vulnerabilities for more severe COVID outcomes, so higher mortality and long-term effects of infection. And in particular, we see, if you go to the next slide, sorry, thank you. We see a much higher rate of mortality in African Americans as compared to Caucasians that are infected with COVID. And so some hypotheses as to why this might be occurring is that these racial and ethnic minorities, they disproportionately bear the burden of these underlying comorbidities, so diabetes, cardiovascular disease, asthma, HIV, obesity, cancer. And they also live in more crowded urban conditions and are more likely to be employed in public-facing occupations that make it very difficult to socially distance. And so, indeed, it seems as though socially distancing is a privilege, and one that many are shirking. And I think it is very important to kind of understand the way that this affects these disadvantaged groups, as well as the cancer community, which Katie will talk about.
All right, thanks, Alex, for that overview. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the general effects of COVID-19 on cancer, and we're looking at this kind of in two different time frames. So we're going to look at a short-term and then a long-term time frame, and a lot of the things that I learned about the effects really, really surprised me. There's a lot of stuff that we probably don't take into account. So in terms of the short-term effects, a lot of us know that the pandemic poses a really unique threat to the cancer community because cancer patients are among those who have a really high risk of a serious illness from infection. And this is because their immune systems are often weakened by cancer and its treatments. So especially if you're going through cancer treatments such as chemo, you are immunocompromised. So that makes it very, very scary to be a cancer patient right now when there's a global health pandemic. Most people who were treated for cancer in the past are likely to have normal immune function, but each person is different. So it's important that all cancer patients and cancer survivors talk with a doctor so they can really understand their current medical situation and their immune situation. So a recent study that was published in May of this year found a disturbingly high mortality rate among COVID-19 patients who also have cancer. It analyzed 800 cancer patients in the UK who had COVID-19 and cancer, and it found that 28% of those patients lost their battle and they passed away. So this study really indicates that cancer treatments such as chemotherapy don't necessarily have an effect on mortality, but other factors such as old age and additional comorbidity do. And it concludes that withholding effective cancer treatments from a lot of cancer patients during the pandemic will run a really real risk of increasing cancer morbidity and mortality, perhaps much more so than COVID-19 itself. And then additionally, another short-term effect is that cancer outcomes are really impacted by the recent rise in unemployment. It's led to the loss of healthcare coverage for a large group of already at-risk populations. And we discussed this in our last event, Affording Access, where Ariana Anaya, a representative from the Foundation's Communications in Austin, came to talk about how to afford cancer and basically just financial options for people seeking treatment. So because of unemployment, this can lead to an access or lack of access in screening, prevention, and treatment, and it just adds on to the stress of cancer and the stress of basically affording access to healthcare. So these short-term effects are probably pretty apparent to people already, but what I find particularly disturbing are the long-term effects, which aren't as apparent, and they can also be pretty difficult to predict. However, they're going to have far-reaching impacts on cancer care and outcome that can span decades. So what this means is that an entire generation of cancer patients are going to be feeling the effects of COVID-19, which is really scary. So in general, the earlier that you detect cancer, the likelier you are to beat it. However, during the pandemic, there's already been a pretty steep drop in cancer diagnoses, but there's no reason to believe that the actual incidence of cancer has dropped. So cancers that are being missed now are going to come to light eventually, but at a later stage and probably with a worse prognosis. And right now, one of the reasons that many diagnoses are being delayed is because cancer screening services have been paused. So a lot of these routine screenings of patients without symptoms, they play a very critical role in early detection of various cancers, such as breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and cervical cancer. However, because of the pandemic, a lot of institutions have paused their screenings because healthcare providers are balancing the risk of COVID-19 with that of waiting weeks or perhaps even months to test patients. So in March, it was actually estimated that the appointments for these cancer screenings were down 86 to 94%, which is a really, really scary number. And actually in the UK, at the beginning of this month, the total backlog of people waiting for screening after 10 weeks of lockdown was 2.1 million people. And for every week of screening that's paused, 7,000 people aren't being referred for further tests that they may need, and 380 cancers aren't being diagnosed for screening programs. Those are really scary numbers. And Dr. Norman Sharpless, the director of the National Cancer Institute, agrees. He modeled the effect of COVID-19 on cancer screening in the long term, and this is the graphic that you see on the left. He made a conservative prediction that in the next 10 years, in the United States, there's going to be an excess of 10,000 deaths from breast and colorectal cancer. And according to Dr. Sharpless, there can be no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic is causing delayed diagnoses and suboptimal care for people with cancer. Now, another one of the hidden long-term effects that some people may not think about is the effect of research and clinical trials. A clinical trial is essentially a research study to see if a new treatment will provide better outcomes than existing care standards. And they're so important because they're vital in developing new treatments for cancer and other serious conditions. Cancer patients who volunteer for these trials have often exhausted other traditional options such as chemotherapy, or they may not be able to afford it. And for Renee Roach, who is a stage 4 cancer patient, she viewed clinical trials as basically her only chance left to knock out cancer. However, COVID-19 has forced hundreds of labs and clinical trials to shut down with a 74% decrease in enrollment worldwide, which really stalls research into cancer. And drug makers, university medical centers, hospitals, community research centers, they're all suspending various research projects because of the outbreak. So Renee doesn't know when the trial she's hoping to take part in will reopen. It could be months or longer, and there's a chance that when it does open, she's past the point when she's eligible to participate. In fact, Dr. Richard Shilsky, the chief medical officer at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, states that a lot of the data from many of the studies that were eagerly anticipated is going to take a really long time to develop, and it's going to slow down the entire cancer research enterprise. For cancer patients who are hoping for a new drug or treatment option, that is absolutely devastating news. There's such a long timeline from basic cancer research to changes in cancer care, and it's clear that the effects of pausing research today may lead to slowdowns in cancer progress for so many years to come. So now I'll hand it off to Claire for the next slide.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, it was absolutely staggering to hear. Sorry, I'm hearing feedback. It was absolutely staggering to learn a lot of these long-term effects as well as the short-term ones that a lot of us aren't really aware of. And so in addition to learning about those, we wanted to share with you how COVID has impacted particular cancers, such as bone and blood cancers. These patients often rely on life-saving transplants from donors to cure their cancers, as many of you know if you participated in our Be the Match event with Match for Equality. And so unfortunately, the donation and transplant process is being stalled and even postponed in a lot of places. And this is happening because even though bone marrow or stem cell donation could cure a person's cancer and ultimately save their life, it isn't a guarantee. And so many centers are deciding that these donations and transplants should be considered non-essential right now as we focus on COVID-19, and therefore they're being pushed back and canceled. So as you can see in this graphic here, it's been predicted that there will be roughly 2,500 less donors in just the Central and South Texas regions alone. And of course, not having as many people joining the registry means that those who are currently in need of a donor aren't going to have as large of a pool of people to seek from. And also, it's even more devastating to see that about 1,000 less transplants are going to be facilitated on a national level. And so this means that there are 1,000 less patients who are actively looking for a transplant that will continue to suffer due to their cancer as it progresses, and they won't be able to get these transplants. Caroline Bick, a 2019 Ozarks writer on our alumni, is on the registry, and she was contacted earlier this year as a potential match for someone in need of a transplant. And about a month and a half ago, she told me that she was told that she was the perfect candidate for that patient, which is amazing. And she was all ready to donate. But unfortunately, since then, the center has been slow to respond to Caroline, and she senses that they are going to postpone her transplant, and she's worried that she may not be in the country in a few months when that transplant would take place. And so we can see in that example how somebody is in need of her transplant. She is a perfect match for them, but that's being pushed back to focus on the virus right now. And also, in a different way, many bone and blood cancer patients and patients of many other kinds, like my friend Hayden, have complications due to their transplants. So Hayden struggled with graft versus host disease in his lungs, which meant that he needed help getting oxygen to his lungs, and therefore was reliant on a ventilator. And in many hospitals, ventilators are only available in the ICU unit. And this area right now in most hospitals is being converted into a COVID center. And so for people like Hayden, who might be reliant on this technology, it would be really difficult for him if he needed to be hospitalized right now. So there are a lot of complications that cancer patients deal with due to their treatment that are definitely being affected by the virus and the current state of our hospitals. And so to close this presentation, we just want to call you to action. So first, we ask that if you can, you stay home. This is not only to protect those who are immunocompromised, but also for the future of cancer treatment, research, and outcomes, as Katie told us. And second, if you aren't already part of the registry, we ask you to join. It's something that many of us can do right now, even from our couches at home. It's extremely important for those in need of a transplant, and all you need to do to get started in the process is text T4K to 61474, scrolling across the bottom of the screen there, to begin the process. You'll be mailed a swabbing kit, and all you have to do is swab your cheeks, mail the kit back, and make sure to link your contact information to your account. So if you are lucky enough to be contacted in the future, and are identified as a potential match, then the registry can find you and they can get that going. And the registry is in dire need of registrations of all types, but particularly from minority groups, because as we mentioned, unfortunately, non-white patients have a much lower chance of finding that match. And so we urge all of you to join the registry, regardless of your race, and join us in the fight against cancer in that way. And so to wrap up, I just want to say that first and foremost, we decided not to ride this summer, and we stayed home because we knew that we could be COVID carriers and potentially infect those who we would have come into contact with, many of whom are current or past cancer patients. We don't ride because we can continue to fight cancer from home by doing simple things like wearing our masks, social distancing, joining the registry, and donating to cancer fighting organizations. We know that while many things are being put on hold right now, cancer persists, meaning that those who are currently sick are still needing to receive treatment. Cancer survivors are still needing to receive care from the effects of their disease, and many others, of course, are actively being diagnosed. So we feel incredibly lucky that we're able to support the communities that are vulnerable right now from our homes and engage with our audience virtually for short-term, we're also glad we can engage with you guys virtually about both the short-term and long-term effects this pandemic will have on cancer. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation from us. Awesome. Oh. Cool. And so next, we are very excited to introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Jon Huigbreste. Not only is he a fellow cyclist, but he also researched cancer in the past and is currently working on research for the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're so excited to be able to hear from him, as he'll provide a wonderful perspective as someone with experience in both areas, and can sort of tell us about how those two are converging right now. So thank you for joining us, Jon.
Oh, my pleasure. Wow, those were three amazing presentations, and I wasn't nervous until I heard those presentations, so hopefully I'll live up to those. Yeah, I'm Jon Huigbreste. I'm a professor in the Department of Molecular Biosciences, and I'm the director of the ICMB, Institute for Cell and Molecular Biology, which runs 3 graduate programs in cell and molecular biology, biochemistry, and microbiology. And I'm the outgoing director, but I just throw that out there just because if any of you are interested in graduate studies in molecular biology, I would be happy to discuss that with any of you. So I've been here at UT for 20 years, almost exactly, this summer. And little background, I went to the University of Michigan as an undergraduate, and that's also where I got my PhD in biochemistry. And I did my postdoctoral work at the NIH, at the National Cancer Institute. And I'll start out in a second telling you a little bit of the work that initiated back there and how it eventually led to where we are now. And so I was at NIH for a time, about 3 years, and then moved up to Harvard Medical School when my supervisor at NIH moved up to become faculty there. So my postdoctoral stint was between Bethesda, Maryland and Boston. And then I was an assistant professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey for 5 years before moving here in the year 2000. And so been here ever since. And my teaching responsibility here is cancer biology, tumor biology, Bio 336. If there's any, I know not all of, some of you are science majors, I know. And so this is an upper level undergraduate course in cancer biology. It's cross-listed as a graduate course as well. And I've taught that for quite a few years. So let's see if I could have the first slide, next slide then. Yeah, so I'm kind of going to give you in a few slides here, kind of like a 25-year overview of what I've been doing and where our work started and how it's kind of is a demonstration of how science takes you in unexpected places you never intended to go if you just follow your investigative sense. So this slide is related to human papillomaviruses, which is going way back to the days of when I was doing my postdoctoral work. I was at a lab at NIH that was interested in the role of HPVs and cancer, particularly uterine cervical cancer. And we now know that those HPVs play a role in over 99% of all cervical cancer and a majority of head and neck cancers as well. So if we could have the next slide. So as you probably know, human papillomaviruses and the sexually transmitted HPVs, again, are clearly the cause of cervical cancer. And I just want to make a couple points here, is that this is a type of cancer that's controllable, right? So for the last few decades, it's been controlled through early diagnosis and treatment. That has been the way to combat this cancer, early detection by way of pap smears. And that's worked great. But of course, going back to some of the comments we heard already, that requires access to healthcare, right? And regular healthcare. And even in this country, not to mention many other parts of the world, access to good health care is hard to come by. And if we go to the next slide then. So this is a slide from the Merck vaccine website. As you also are certainly aware, there are now HPV vaccines available over the past 10 years or so. And these are going to hopefully be a very important tool worldwide in terms of combating not only cervical cancer in women, but head and neck cancers in both males and females. And this particular screenshot highlights the point that it shouldn't be only the female young people who are getting this vaccine, but the male population as well. So this is a type of cancer that is, beautiful example, one that can be controlled, and man, there's just like no excuse for this existing, at least in the near future. Hopefully it'll be wiped out worldwide. But of course, worldwide, this is still the #2 killer after breast cancer in women worldwide in terms of cancer-related deaths. Okay, so if I go to the next slide, so in 2008, the Nobel Prize was given for the discovery of HPVs and the fact that they cause cervical cancer, and that was given on the left there to Harold Sirhausen, working in Germany. So, it emphasizes the fact that this is a virus that's associated with cancer. Luckily, there aren't a lot of pathogens that are associated with cancers, not a lot of viruses, not a lot of microbes, but there's a few, and those few end up being responsible for quite a number of cancers worldwide. When you think of hepatitis viruses, Helicobacter pylori, and stomach cancer, right? So a small number of pathogens have a very, very significant effect on total cancer rates worldwide. Next slide. So to tell you what my contribution or my work in that HPV field was, okay, so we have this association of HPVs with cervical cancer. The question is, what is that virus doing? What are the proteins that are made by that virus? What are they doing that is actually promoting the development of cancer? In other words, biochemically, what is the mechanism by which they're acting? And that was a pretty fascinating question, because it turns out there's exactly 2 viral proteins called E6 and E7 that are expressed in virtually every HPV positive cancer. And these are really small, simple proteins. They're not enzymes. They are proteins that interact with, they're expressed by the virus, and they go and interact with other proteins in the cell. And it turns out that the E6 protein interacts with P53 and a protein called P53 and shuts it down. E7 interacts with a protein called the retinoblastoma protein and shuts it down. And you don't have to, I know maybe some of you will be familiar with the names of those proteins, others may never have heard of them before, but the important thing is that those are the let's say probably the 2 most central tumor suppressor proteins in all of cancer biology. So in other words, the fact that E6 and E7 are interacting and inactivating those 2 proteins provided a perfect mechanistic explanation for how the virus was mechanistically associated with cancer. Okay, and if I could have the next slide. And I'm going to tell you real briefly for maybe the biologists in the crowd here, how that viral E6 protein is working, because this is really fascinating, not only to understand the mechanism of this viral protein, how it was involved in cancer, but it really gave some amazing insight into other cellular processes that occur in the cell. So in this diagram here, I'm showing the viral E6 protein in green there. It comes into the cell and it interacts with this protein called E6AP indicated there. And that protein is what's called a ubiquitin ligase. And what's happening there is that ligase is attaching a protein in yellow, which is ubiquitin, to a protein called P53, this tumor suppressor. And what was known at the time was that ubiquitin in yellow, when that gets attached, when it gets transferred to another protein in this long array of ubiquitin molecules, that is a signal to destroy that protein through the proteasome. It's kind of like the cellular garbage disposal. So in other words, E6 coming into the cell was hijacking this protein called E6AP and telling it to do something that it didn't normally do, which is attach ubiquitin to this specific protein called P53. The destruction of P53 is exactly the mechanism by which E6 is promoting the development of cancer. If the cell gets rid of P53, it's getting rid of a brake on many aspects of processes that are important in controlling cancer. Okay? So that was a pretty big deal at the time. It was the first ubiquitin ligase ever molecularly characterized. And that led us for many years, if I can have if you could click there, right? So that led us into some real biochemical aspects of how this ubiquitin system works in the cell. And now it's considered to be one of the most important control mechanisms for many, many cellular processes. And frankly, quite a few Nobel Prizes have been given that are directly or indirectly related to understanding how the ubiquitin system functions. Most recently, just last year, a Nobel Prize given for understanding how the VHL protein works in von Hippel-Lindau cancers. That's directly related to the ubiquitin system. So over the years, if you could click one more time there, we started looking at, we got really into the biochemical weeds of how the ubiquitin system was working, looking in yeast. Next click, please. That led us to some other things that were really cool to us, not related to cancer really, in terms of protein quality control, and click again. And we spun off some technology that was based on this biochemistry. It was all really fun. And so that was kind of, I would say, the kind of, as a scientist, that's what's illustrated there is what I was really kind of known for, is working in the biochemistry of the ubiquitin system. Next slide. Okay, so that protein I was talking about, ubiquitin, which becomes attached to other proteins and serving as a signal for destruction, led us to an interest in this other protein called ISG15, which looks a lot like ubiquitin, right? So in other words, we had this protein ubiquitin that was we started to understand how it worked, that it was a signal for destruction of other proteins in the cell. And then we realized that, hey, there's other proteins that look a lot like ubiquitin. They don't really have anything to do with protein degradation. But this one that I'm showing here on this slide, called ISG15, was of particularly interest to us because it looked like it was involved in controlling viral infections, right? So this protein, like ubiquitin, becomes attached to other proteins, but it's only expressed when the innate immune system comes on in response to either viral and, in some cases, microbial infections, right? So it suggests that you get an infection by certain types of viruses, this thing gets expressed and conjugated, attached to other proteins in the cell, and somehow that attachment is antiviral. It's an aspect of how your cells respond to a viral infection to control that infection, okay? Next slide. Oops, that got a little messed up. And I don't want to go through this in any detail here, except to say that we think we know how ISG15 conjugation is antiviral. It's really becoming conjugated to proteins that viruses make in an infected cell. And the attachment of that ISG15 to the viral protein is a way of your cells trying to limit or to screw up the function of those viral proteins, to block the viral replication cycle. It's what we call the monkey wrench hypothesis in our lab, that ISG15 is kind of being broadly attached like a sticky bomb to viral proteins in order to inactivate them somehow, right? To control the viral infection, okay? So next slide. Okay, that brings us to SARS-CoV-2, because what had been becoming clear was that as I just said, ISG15 is antiviral. It's being conjugated to block the virus, right? Well, viruses are smart, and there's like this arms race that goes on between an organism and the viruses that infect that organism. The cell, for example, a human has evolved to make ISG15 and a lot of other proteins to control viral infections. Well, viruses counteract that in many cases by developing a mechanism that overcomes that cellular response, right? And that was clear for in ISG15 in particular, it was clear that flu does that, influenza virus does that. In other words, influenza virus really hates that attachment of ISG15 to its proteins, and it's found a way to overcome that. And it turns out that so has SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID-19. It has found a way of overcoming this effect of ISG15 conjugation on viral replication. Okay, so that brings us to this protein that's made by SARS-CoV-2 called PL-PRO. The pro stands for the fact that it's a protease. And so a lot of viruses make proteases for various reasons. And this protease encoded by COVID-2 is essential for viral survival, for viral replication. And it actually does two things. It is essential for the virus because the virus is, COVID-2 is a really complex, as far as viruses go, it's very complex. I would say the two viruses that we've studied the most, HPVs and coronaviruses, are on opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to complexity. HPVs are simple viruses with small genomes. Coronaviruses are huge viruses, huge genomes, hugely complex. And one of the complexities is that it makes its proteins in a long polyprotein. And then this proteolytic activity encoded by the virus itself comes and chops up that protein into the functional proteins of the virus, okay? So it's a protease that's making the functional proteins that's required for the virus to survive and replicate. Okay, well, it turns out that that protease catalyzes a different or related event, and that is it removes that antiviral protein ISG15 from viral proteins, right? So it's doing two things. It's making the mature viral proteins, and at the same time, it's overcoming the effect of ISG15 on the negative effect of ISG15 on viral replication by essentially, remember I said the cell is putting ISG15 onto viral proteins, while coronavirus is making PL-PRO to chop that right back off, right? To allow viral replication to begin with, okay? So it's a multifunctional protease, critical for viral replication and critical for overcoming this innate immune response to the viral infection, okay? So that's pretty cool. And if you could click twice, that indicates to us, just, we're not brilliant here, lots of people have had this idea is that if you could identify an inhibitor, a chemical inhibitor, a drug that blocked the protease activity of PL-PRO, in one fell swoop, you would prevent the cleavage of that viral polyprotein and replication wouldn't happen. And even if you didn't do that 100% effectively, you would also, by blocking the removal of ISG15, you would essentially reactivate that antiviral response. So it would be a 2-for-1 with respect to drug action here, okay? So that's what we became interested in. And I have to say, going back to the complexity of coronaviruses and kind of making a positive, hopeful statement here about COVID-19, is that SARS-CoV-2 has many vulnerabilities. It encodes many enzymatic activities, not only PL-PRO. It has it codes, I think it's like at least half a dozen different enzymatic activities. And enzymes generally are what you want to target when you're going after drug therapy. In contrast, let's compare it back to HPVs. HPVs, they make like, half a dozen proteins. Not a single one of them is an enzyme. None of them are enzymes, right? They're going in, the viral proteins that are made are messing around with other cellular proteins, but not enzymatically. And there are no good drug targets there. So luckily we have early detection in the case of HPVs. We have a vaccine against HPVs, but one thing we don't have are antiviral drugs against HPVs because there's no good drug targets. Not that people haven't tried, but it hasn't been fruitful. Compared to COVID-2, with multiple, that encodes multiple enzymes, it's just chock full of vulnerabilities. And our problem as scientists right now is that we're trying to do science in a hurry, right? We want our antivirals next week or today, if preferably, right? And science is hard to do quickly, right? But my hopeful message there is that is that it's just a matter of time. We're going to crack this thing, right? It's just full of vulnerabilities. Okay, if I could have the next slide. Okay, so this slide here kind of illustrates. I'm getting up there. I get a little long in the tooth. I've been doing this, running a lab here, and as an independent investigator for now 25 years. And this one slide here kind of encompasses those 25 years. So if you start at the top there, we started working on, or I started as a postdoc working on viruses, human papillomaviruses, and their association with cervical cancer. Pretty important problem. We figured out how HPVs are hijacked, well, how they're functioning mechanistically in cancer by hijacking a component of the ubiquitin system. And that led us for many years to just dive whole hog into ubiquitin biochemistry, trying to figure out how these enzymes work, what roles they play in cells. Took us in lots of different interesting directions. And then we became interested in ISG15, which shared all this biochemistry with the ubiquitin pathway, but it was really aimed at controlling viral infections. We became interested in that actually through a colleague, Bob Krug, who worked down the hall on influenza. He's the one who first brought it to our attention. We said, wow, we can apply all this knowledge that we've gained over the years and studying the ubiquitin biochemistry. Let's apply it to ISG15. So that's what brought us back to viruses, right? So we start making this curve back to where we started with, in this realization that a lot of viruses, including flu and now coronaviruses, they really appear to hate this ISG15 protein because they're going out of their way to negate the antiviral effects of ISG15, right? So that's the strongest circumstantial evidence. They really, really don't like ISG15 because they've gone out of their way to essentially evolve a gene that encodes a protein that overcomes that, right? It's the strongest evidence, circumstantial evidence, that ISG15 is antiviral because viruses can't stand it, all right? And that led us to this concept of we need to find inhibitors of this enzymatic activity that's overcoming the effect of ISG15, and that's also involved in making viral polyprotein, or mature viral proteins. And now what I haven't told you yet, but the last line on there is that we are about, in the next day or two, hopefully we're aiming for tomorrow, but maybe it'll be Monday or Tuesday, we are ready to submit a paper for publication to Science where we have identified an FDA-approved drug that's been used in the clinic for a long time. So in other words, doesn't need to go through safety or anything because it's been used for decades. We know the pharmacokinetics, we know the possible risks, we know dosages that it can be tolerated at in patients. And the point is that we've shown that this FDA-approved drug inhibits directly the coronavirus PL-Pro protein, this proteolytic activity. So what we're going to propose in this publication is that, look, We've got an FDA-approved drug. We have a mechanism of action. And in collaboration with scientists at Washington University in St. Louis, who have a BSL-3 facility, we've shown that this drug inhibits coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 replication in cell culture models at incredibly low concentrations, at concentrations that we think we can easily deliver to patients. And so we're very excited that this is going to be actually useful in the current crisis. And since all these beta coronaviruses, MERS, SARS-CoV-1, also encoded PL proenzyme, we think not only will this drug potentially be useful in the current crisis, but that it'll be something to stockpile and be ready for the next coronavirus pandemic, which is surely coming, right? You've seen 3 obvious ones emerge in the last 20 years. There's going to be more, okay? And when you think about it in terms of research, what hasn't happened since the MERS and SARS-CoV-1 is, when those viruses disappeared, so did the research, right? And we can't do that. That was a mistake. We got to keep at it. Obviously, I don't think we need to convince anybody of that right now. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. And, one more slide. Yeah. So I'm a big cyclist. So, this was like the perfect storm of me being here. I work on cancer, COVID-19 tonight with this discussion. And I'm also a big cyclist. This is one of my bikes. This is the bicycle that took me to first place in the Texas State Time Trial Championships in my age group last year. So I'm the reigning 2019 Texas Time Trial Champion in my age group. And unfortunately, that I should have defended that title last Saturday, but of course that, like your ride to Alaska, was shut down because of the current crisis. So the only silver lining is I get to hang on to that jersey for a few more months until hopefully it gets rescheduled. But anyway, if you can click once there, I'm on Strava, like I'm sure many of you are. So follow me and I'll follow you right back. Okay. And I'll take any questions if you have any, or if you want to. I know there's some pre-prepared questions too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that talk. That was so interesting. I think for everyone, science and non-science, I am personally going into an MD PhD in the fall, and I'm hoping to study cancer and really interested in oncolytic viruses. And so it's really cool to hear you talk on your history, your path through research, and just how some of these things clicked into place and those unexpected connections that you make that will bring you into an entirely different field. So interesting, so cool. And it's amazing to hear that you've made these discoveries with a drug that seems to be effective, and thinking long term too for the health of our globe and the human population. So it's so cool to hear from you. I can kick this off with a question, and if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to stick them in the Facebook. But I wanted to ask you, to start off, we have a vaccine for HPV, which is essentially a vaccine for cancer, it sounds miraculous, right? It's incredible that that's preventable, that we could eradicate an entire grouping of cancer, or cause of cancer at least. And so my question is, why do not more viruses cause cancer? Why don't all viruses cause cancer?
Good question. But there's a real simple, a real simple answer to that, in the sense that if you take the example of HPVs and cervical cancer, the virus has absolutely no interest in causing cancer. Okay, it's a complete, and if you think about the mechanism of what's going on there, which I don't have time to go into, it's actually a dead end for the virus, and it does them no good, right? And it's one big mistake, right? So in other words, those cancers aren't making virus, right? It's a viral infection like most others, where it gets in, it wants to replicate and go on to your next sexual partner, right? It has no interest. Cervical cancer is a complete mistake. And for the virus, and it's obviously a bad thing for the host. Okay, and to illustrate the mistake aspect of it, it's that we talk about cervical cancer. We don't talk that much about HPV-related penile cancers. It happens, right? Yeah. But that's even a more rare mistake. Okay, so so why don't more viruses cause cancer? It's kind of amazing that any of them do. But of course, historically, over the past 30, 40, 50 years, understanding those few viruses that do cause cancer has led to incredible insights into the molecular genetics of cancer, right? Because like I showed with the E6 and E7 proteins of HPV, figuring out what they did as viral proteins told us about something about the normal function of the proteins that they were inactivating and their importance in cancer. So in other words, P53 and RB are important in many, many cancers. And the fact that that virus in that one particular case was targeting those was just like, it explains so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was super fascinating to hear. And so I was wondering, many of us don't realize that a lot of what's going on in labs today in the worlds of cancer and COVID research relies on projects and studies that were done many years ago. So I wanted to know from you if you could speak to just the research, the importance of research in general.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Science takes time, and, we're in a hurry with COVID-19, like I said. And I think it's illustrative that, you think about the flu pandemic of 1918. Okay? Here we are, 102 years later. And literally, like 2 years ago, the first flu-specific antiviral, a drug called Xofluza, was approved and in use, developed in Japan. And what's really interesting about that, so in one sense, it took 102 years to find an antiviral that was specific for a flu enzyme. What's also interesting there, to narrow it down a little bit, is that the mechanism by which Xofluza works, the drug the enzyme that it's inhibiting, that was discovered by Bob Krug, who recently retired from UT, about at least 30 years ago, right? So Tony Fauci, who's now a household name, he wasn't a household name a couple years ago, right? But he's been an NIAID director for many years now. He was testifying before Congress about the importance of funding for NIH research. And he brought up this Xofluza story. And he held up Bob Krug's paper published in the, I forget what year, like late 70s or something, early, He held that up as an example. It said, this is why you invest in research for the long haul, right? Okay, too bad it took 30 years to develop this drug, but that's what it took, right? And that basic science that was done 30 years ago was what absolutely directly, can draw a direct line to the introduction of this antiviral drug for flu. So critical. Right? And
then for our last question, I saw that Tony commented and he asked, how long have you been a cyclist?
Oh, that's easy.
A fun one.
Father's Day, 2002. Wow. My wife bought me my first Trek hybrid, like, because I hadn't ridden a bike in years. Right? And I quickly graduated from that hybrid. I don't know how many bikes I've had by now. And I'm narrowing in another month. It'll be 100,000 documented miles. So.
Wow.
Well, it sounds like you are more qualified to bike to Alaska.
Oh, you've lapped us a few times, I gotta say. That's incredible.
That is truly amazing.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part about cycling?
Oh my God. I like a couple things, right? So I showed you my time trial bike. I love this. It's really a scientific aspect to it. And in terms of aerodynamics and speed and just trying to go as fast as you can, as long I'm pretty intense. I don't go for easy rides ever, I think. But But I love that the feeling of just going fast, going up steep hills, long rides. Yeah, lots of stories I could tell. Bike with us next year to Alaska. As I was saying earlier before the start, I said I'm waiting for you guys, faculty to come with me. Maybe chaperones or someone to buy you beer. I don't know.
Well,
that could be cool.
If faculty members are ever able to be a part of Texas 4000, we will make sure that you are the first.
All right.
All right. Well, this has been such an awesome talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Huigbreste, for speaking with us today. I personally am not a STEM major, and I found this so exciting and so hopeful and just really inspirational to hear about. So really thank you again. And it's really awesome to know that you're a serious cyclist too. So I'm going to add you on Strava after this.
Thank you. And you three did a wonderful job as hosts, and I may be calling you to be guest lecturers in my tumor biology.
That would be wonderful.
I'm so happy.
All right. Thank you. Have
you.
a great rest of your night, Dr. Huigbreste.
Okay, goodbye.
So now for the final part of our program, we would like to share some stories from our teammates. So we're going to present a video, and it's going to feature Bryn from the Sierra route, Nikki from the Sierra route, and Paige from the Rockies route. They're going to be sharing their family's experiences with cancer care during COVID-19. And I just want to really deeply thank them for sharing their stories today to advocate for better cancer care tomorrow. Speaking so candidly like this is really not easy, and I'm so touched by the openness, the courage, and the hope that they've shown. Our team has so much respect and love for these people, and we're really inspired by their stories. So we hope that you guys really enjoyed as well. So we'll go ahead and throw the video up there and watch it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bryn Thompson. I'm a 2020 Sierra rider for the Texas 4000 team. And I'm here with my dad, and we're going to be answering some questions today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe. Hi, my name's Faye Chagan, and I'm a 2020 Texas 4000 writer on Rockies.
My name is Nikki. I am a Sierra writer, and I'm so excited to be able to share my cancer and COVID story.
So I joined T4K when I first started for my band director in middle school, whose husband passed away from brain cancer. My neighbors growing up, whose father passed away from lung cancer. My Aunt Mary, who had colon cancer, was a cancer survivor.
Mary's my sister.
Yeah, Mary's his sister. And then over the course of my time in T4K, my reasons for writing has changed as well. So my mom's best friend, Kathy, was diagnosed with breast cancer and received treatment. I learned that, I've learned, hundreds of stories of people that have been affected by cancer, but obviously the biggest one was when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in January, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But he's obviously a big reason that I ride now, and how my story has been changed a lot throughout my time in Texas 4000. And I don't ride this summer because of, the impact that COVID can have on the immunocompromised.
I originally joined Texas 4000 because my grandfather passed away from lung cancer, my aunt passed away from lung cancer, and my other aunt also passed away from leukemia when she was 7 years old. So that was my initial motive for joining the organization. But as many writers have stated these past few weeks, I think that our reasons for being on the team have transformed since the 2 years ago that we decided to become a part of Texas 4000.
So I joined Texas 4000 in honor of my family's cancer experience. When I was 10 years old, my sister was diagnosed with a rare brain and spinal cancer. And from that point, we've had a really long and winding journey. We've done numerous surgeries on top of radiation and chemo treatment, and it's all led us to today. She's 23, currently on another cycle of chemo treatment, and she will be doing that for another year or so. And Texas 4000 was a way for me to come to terms with my cancer story and to be able to share that with others. And as someone who's been extremely private about my story before Texas 4000 came along, it was such a blessing for me to be able to talk about everything that has happened in my life. It's incredibly unfortunate that we don't get to ride this summer, but you have no idea how happy it makes me that this organization is prioritizing the cancer community and how vulnerable they are to contracting COVID-19.
January 10th was that's when I found out I was metastatic. I mean, with no warning. I was in good health. I run, I exercise, I eat well. I was in great shape.
He's ran several marathons. We did one together one year even.
I never thought of myself as, that person, the 1 in 6,000. I never could have imagined it. Anyway, that was my diagnosis, and it was, again, right before the COVID crisis kind of hit.
Yeah. 2020 has been our year.
Oh, boy, has it.
My dad was actually diagnosed with skin cancer last month. He has melanoma on his back, and I can't attest to what treatment would have been like before the pandemic because he was actually diagnosed after the pandemic had already begun. But I think that the main things that have been different about how his treatment would have been would be that we had to schedule the surgery pretty far out because doctors are operating in a much lower capacity. So we weren't actually able to get him in until today. He's at the hospital right now having his tumor removed. And our family has been on quarantine and severely social distancing ever since, just to ensure that we're not giving him any kind of illness before he has to go into surgery.
So my sister's battle has been a long, strenuous one. Her diagnosis is lifelong, and she will only get worse and never get better, which is something I'm still coming to terms with because she seems so fine. We've had some really low moments, times when we really didn't see a path. We've also had some really great moments, like when she got a Make-A-Wish in 2014 and chose to see a bunch of her favorite celebrities at San Diego Comic-Con, or when she graduated high school and worked her butt off in community college and ended up getting into Texas A&M, which was a big deal because she's super passionate about policy making, and so she's able to pursue that. Her battle is long from over, but the past couple of months have really made it difficult for us to be able to see everything that is coming in the future in terms of her cancer plan. So her treatment hasn't been super affected by the pandemic. We've been really lucky that most of her doctors are okay with virtual appointments, and she's also on oral chemo pills, so she doesn't have to go to a treatment center and get an IV and all that. We did have to risk it and do a couple MRIs and 4 back-to-back days of radiation in early mid-March because we were super scared and we just wanted to get it over with before cases blew up in Texas. The pandemic has created a lot of uncertainty surrounding whether or not she can receive treatments in a timely manner. For instance, one of the clinics that she goes to had her MRI delayed for a month because of COVID and told her to call back when things have changed. The reason why is because my sister needs to go under general anesthesia for each MRI because they last at least 3 hours, and she has neuropathy from her nerve damage from prior surgeries, and she also has a regular twitch when her body is relaxed, and so the MRI would not work. The clinic said that they couldn't sedate her because her case wasn't severe enough to warrant invasive sedation through an IV since she has a slow-growing tumor. But it doesn't erase all of the chronic pain that she still deals with on a day-to-day basis. And the reason why we need all these appointments to happen on a timely manner is because we just want to make sure that there's nothing else going on. And so my sister and I had a bit of a chat today, and we just talked about what the pandemic has felt like for her. And she said that the isolation during COVID-19 has been positive on her end. She feels like there are more people who can relate to how she feels on any given day. And she's also been having a lot of fun talking more to her friends because they're more available, and also having fun helping them find stuff to not be bored, just because this is kind of her reality, just staying at home. And so the biggest difference from pre-pandemic and now is just the fear factor of knowing that there are people out there not socially distancing, not wearing masks, as well as the financial strain that comes from COVID. We've had to really adjust our financial priorities, and on top of the financial toxicity that already existed in our family due to the payments for cancer care we still have to pay, the experience is only going to get harder.
Because of COVID, we had to stop travel. There's too many risks associated with, all the, being out in the public space. I mean, the travel would have forced us to stay in places with people, and we would just, our doctor just said, well, we can find a local oncologist and we can work with them on your treatment, but you don't have to travel. We can do everything near home. So in the end, it was seamless. I mean, the treatment never stopped. The response has been really, thank God, really positive. And so I really can't say that it's affected my treatment, but it has definitely affected our lives. And I would say that that's probably something we couldn't, I mean, having cancer is one thing. I mean, it doesn't really, I mean, my immunity's stayed healthy throughout the treatment. They monitor it every week. And, I would have a lot of freedom to go about my life when I'm feeling well in between treatments. But now, I mean, I can't go anywhere. I mean, we go maybe occasionally visit friends in their patios, the backyard, in the driveways. We do some outdoor stuff. But I mean, the life is just so much different. I can't go to Home Depot. I don't, I just.
The big tragedy for my dad.
So anyway, that's kind of how I summarize it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even like when he was first getting treatment before COVID really got bad in the States, there was a period of time where we were conscious of like, I think this is actually a different question that we're going to talk about, but the fact that you don't know what's going to happen to your immunity when you start receiving chemotherapy. For my dad's case, he's fortunate enough where he's been able, like you said, to keep his immunity in pretty good place. Like it hasn't been affected by his chemo much. Whereas other people, they lose white blood cells and they can't fight off infection as well. It just depends on the person and like the level of chemo they're getting, or just depends.
Yeah, the combination has been really high impact on how I would normally live my life socially and being active.
Everyone's different about that.
Yeah, the combination has definitely had a bigger impact than either one by itself.
Yeah, I think you've expressed this to me before too, of like, oh, now that like with the diagnosis, like I don't know, I want to like live my life to the fullest possible way. Now that it's been changed, and like I don't know how long I have, to be quite frank, and you want to do as many things as you can possibly do, and like see your family and go on trips and do all this stuff, and I think it's hard because you're not able to do all of that. You can to some extent, but it's really not to the fullness that you would prefer.
We're going to do a lot of camping.
We're going to do camping, which my family, thankfully, we've been trained for this moment. We went on road trips and camping trips all the time.
Like Bryn said, I mean, normally you might, when you have a diagnosis like mine, you might have months to live, and so you want to use that time as best you can. Now, in my case, the treatment has gone just I don't know, miraculously well.
Yeah.
And now we're going to have some time together, and so we're going to try to make best use of that time, however we can, with or without COVID.
And as someone who is caring for an immunocompromised patient, the loosening of local and federal guidelines on mask wearing and social distancing have created so much uncertainty and provides unnecessary stress for families like myself with immunocompromised patients. There is no set standard that I've seen to minimize infection rates other than socially distancing and wearing a mask. And it has come to a point where we've really had to self-isolate to the point where it's overly cautious because we're not really seeing people do that, or they're making it a political issue when it's not. It's simply just protecting the people that we love. And so when seeing people not wear masks or not socially distance, it makes me really upset. it feels really insulting and like a slap in the face for any caregiver or any family that has an immunocompromised loved one. Like, the lives of those who are at greater risk of COVID are worth losing. That's really how it feels, when in fact my sister is worth saving and protecting at all costs. It makes me have less trust in the local, state, and federal government because they are not advocating for vulnerable populations such as the cancer community, which is why my family has had to take things into our own hands and isolate ourselves until a vaccine comes around. I will say that while I have less trust for people as a whole because of COVID-19, I'm also really appreciative of my Texas 4000 teammates in Austin right now, because they've offered to help me in so many ways, whether that be financially, braving the stores to go grocery shopping for my family, and also through FaceTime calls to keep me occupied and to keep me sane. So thank you to my teammates.
It's like the number of cases, COVID cases, has increased, and the fear of the pandemic has decreased, and people aren't being as diligent as they might have been a couple months ago.
And there's still a lot of people who just don't believe it's necessary, or they don't believe masks work.
Yeah.
But I think, if I can interrupt, Brina,
Go ahead.
I think, there's enough evidence about masks and social distancing out there that it does work. We can look at places where they've done it really well, and we see the results. New York, Michigan, New Jersey. I mean, they're seeing it. The spread has gone way down. They've done remarkably well. It's really seems obvious in the data. So
yeah.
So I mean, maybe they aren't needed everywhere all the time. Maybe it's more localized kind of needs. And I think what needs to happen is more that local authorities are authorized and have the authority to enforce mask wearing and social distancing when they need it. And people just have to accept that as it's best for public health, and it's a law. And if you don't obey it, get a citation, get a fine. That's I think what's necessary now, because there's too many people who just have the opinion that don't work or they're not necessary, and I think they're wrong. But the only way this is going to work is, like traffic laws, you just make the rules, and if you break them, you get a ticket. I think on a positive side, I had to make a trip out the other day, and went to Academy in Round Rock, and I had my mask on, and I was a little worried about it, but I knew I was only going to be in there for a few minutes as doing a return, and I was really surprised. I mean, the majority of people were wearing masks. The vast majority were doing everything they should be doing. And, to me, I took that as kind of I feel loved, because these people are doing that for me, really. They don't know me. They don't know my health condition, but they're doing it for me. And it's a really good feeling when you see your community coming up. And, Round Rock doesn't say you have to, but even Academy, the store, doesn't require it, but people were wearing them. So it was really nice to see.
I think that they caught my dad's melanoma super early, and that I'm extremely optimistic that it's just going to be this one surgery and his cancerous tumor is going to be removed and it won't have spread anywhere. So fingers crossed that that's the case. But it definitely, this whole experience has shown me that nobody's safe from getting cancer. It can affect absolutely anyone, and we all need to be extremely aware that we're in a pandemic and that there are people that are immunocompromised who are much at higher risk than we are.
But I'm just glad that most people are complying with it and wearing their masks and stuff. And it's really just not a big ask to do something like that for someone else's sake. That's
Yeah, it's so easy to do and such a minor inconvenience for a little while.
Yeah, it's just, like, if anything, just like use your empathy for people that don't have control over their situations and that are more greatly affected by COVID, and do what you can do to make an impact in a tiny way, and that can be wearing a mask and staying distant from people. Yeah.
I hope anyone listening to this is being more conscious, and I hope that sharing a little glimpse into what cancer and COVID is like can help y'all play a better role in keeping our cancer community safe.
Hi again, everyone. I want to express the most sincere thanks to Paige, Nikki, Bryn, and her father, Joe, for being willing to participate in this video and share such raw and vulnerable stories about their experiences with cancer and COVID. I think hearing these personal stories, such as these, is often what sticks with us and fuels us to continue to fight cancer. We will always be riding for you and your families. And to today's guest speaker, Dr. Jon Huigbreste, thank you for not only sharing such important information about your research in the worlds of both COVID and cancer, but for making it so digestible for those of us in the audience who are non-STEM like myself. And to everyone who helped, and to everyone who helped us put on these events, in both front of the audience, my fellow teammates on the programs committee, Alex, Katie, Tony, and Yash, and those who are behind the scenes, Emily, Shelby, Ross, and many more, thank you. It's been an incredible experience to be able to put on these programs during our virtual ride. And for anyone who is interested in seeing our past events, Match for Equality, and affording access, you can access them through the Texas 4000 Facebook page or YouTube page. And today's event will be accessible there too. But it felt most fitting to end our series with today's event so we could highlight exactly how the community we advocate for, the cancer community, is being affected and will be affected by this pandemic. In addition to this information, we really wanted to drive home the fact that all of this, is why we don't ride this summer. We stayed home because we knew if we had it would not have been safe for the general public, but particularly for those in the cancer community who are immunocompromised. And on top of that, this virtual experience has really helped us put things into perspective. In the past, many people have used the traditional summer ride experience as a metaphor for what it is like to battle cancer. We know, of course, that we choose to ride our bikes to Alaska, and no cancer patient chooses to battle cancer. But on tough days, like when the weather is bad, we try to remind ourselves that we can't choose to stop biking just because, or just like how cancer patients, when they're feeling exhausted, cannot choose to stop fighting. But the virtual ride, I think, is a much better way to encapsulate some of what a battle with cancer can include. Even outside of COVID-19, patients are at risk while receiving treatment, and therefore they have to distance themselves and experience a lot of feelings of isolation during an already incredibly difficult time. I cannot talk today, sorry. So in a way, this virtual experience has really reminded us that we're lucky to be healthy right now, and that it's not only a privilege, but our responsibility to be socially distant and wear our masks. Again, we feel so lucky to be able to continue to fight cancer from home, and we encourage all of you to join us in this fight by staying at home if you can, wearing masks in public places, remaining distant from your friends and family, swabbing your cheeks, and joining the registry by texting T4K to 61474, engaging in events like this, and financially by donating to cancer fighting organizations. Thank you again to all of you for tuning in. It's a true honor to be able to wear this jersey and have this platform to share such important information.